House. Question number 8. Order. The question number 8, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Was the Auditor-General mistaken when she said in her report on the Saudi Arabia Food Security Partnership that, quote, "We were told that ministry legal advisers were not asked for input or made aware of this cabinet paper or earlier related cabinet papers," end quote. If not, why did he claim on the 27th of June 2015 that ministry legal advisers did provide legal advice for the cabinet paper?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
Speaker, no, the member is misrepresenting my comments of June 27.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary.
David Shearer.
So, Mr Speaker, if there is legal advice, will he now make that advice available to the Auditor-General and to the general public?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
Speaker, the Auditor-General's had access to all of the information that that office has sought. In relation to public release of the legal advice, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee is aware, I think that committee requested the advice. Certainly there have been requests under the Official Information Act, and I've made it clear that the legal advice in these matters is the property of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They have chosen not to waive legal privilege. It would therefore not be consistent with the public interest for me to undermine the Ministry's position.
Supplementary question. David Shearer.
So why was the Auditor-General so incompetent that she did not ask or seek or see the legal advice that Mr McCully says exists?
The
Speaker.
Honourable Murray McCully.
Mr Speaker, I've made it clear that I, for one, respect the work that has been done by the Auditor-General, and I would not associate myself with the remarks made by the member in that question.
Order.
Mr Speaker, why has he and the Attorney-General, even Chris Finnison, both repeatedly claiming, including in the House yesterday, that the government was exposed to a legal claim by Al Khalifa Group or a risk when the Auditor-General found no evidence of such a claim?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
Speaker, in relation to a question earlier today, I referred to both the words used in the Cabinet paper and to the words used by the Auditor-General, and that provides, I believe, absolute clarity that the claims made in the Cabinet paper were absolutely accurate in the eyes of the Auditor-General.
Supplementary question. David Shearer.
Does he still maintain that the Cabinet paper, quote, wasn't drafted by me, it was drafted by officials across a number of agencies, end quote, given that the Auditor-General stated, and contrary to that, quote, officials emphasised to us that the February 2013 Cabinet paper was drafted and revised in Mr McCully's office with involvement from Mr Grosser?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
Speaker, I've answered this question to members in writing on a number of occasions, and I stand by the response provided previously, which states that the drafting process includes consultations amongst the Office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Minister of Trade, the Ministry of Primary Industries and New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. The Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet were aware of the Cabinet paper and provided advice on it. That response is completely consistent with the information provided by the Auditor-General.
Supplementary question. David Shearer.
Given that he still believes that paying millions of dollars to a Saudi millionaire is legitimate, will this form of payment to prominent individuals by himself or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs now become accepted practice in negotiations?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
Speaker, the primary finding of the Auditor-General in the report released yesterday was that some of the outrageous claims made by the member and his colleagues were simply untrue, and that the contract for services was entered into was a lawful contract for services, and that the arrangements were fully compliant with the appropriation of the Parliament.
Order. What? Sorry. Is this a point of order?
Yes, there's a point of order.
I'll
Mr.
hear the
Speaker.
point of order.
Sir, that wasn't to my question. My question was whether it was accepted practice now, not whether that was legal under the Auditor-General's report.
I accept that there is confusion with the answer given to the question. I'll invite the member to ask the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that he still believes that paying millions of dollars to a Saudi millionaire is legitimate, will this form of payment to prominent individuals by himself or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs now become accepted practice in negotiations?
The Honourable Murray McCully.
Mr. Speaker, I'm simply going to repeat that some quite outrageous claims, some quite defamatory claims were made by the member and others in relation to this matter. The Auditor-General completed a report which was delivered to the Parliament yesterday after talking to all of the relevant parties and has made it clear that the very strong accusations made by him and others were simply ill-founded.
A point of order, David.
Mr. Speaker, that was further from my question than my first attempt. So I'm not disputing what the Auditor-General said. I'm just saying, I'm asking whether he considers this to be an accepted practice in future negotiations by his ministry.
I've listened very carefully to the question on 2 occasions. I've listened very carefully to the answer on 2 occasions. The member may not be satisfied with the answer, but certainly in the elaboration of the second answer given by the Minister, he has addressed the question. You can interpret it yourself whichever way you want, but on this occasion, that question's been addressed. I accept, clearly not to the satisfaction of Mr. Shearer.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, I invite you to tell the House in what way the Minister addressed Mr. Shearer's question. There was a statement made.
Order. The member will resume his seat. That is a direct attempt to criticise the ruling I've given. That is a serious matter. The members might not be happy with my ruling. I'm asked to make an instant decision whether the question's been addressed or it hasn't. I've done that. I'd be grateful if the member would accept that and we can move on. Before I take the point of order, I just want to be absolutely clear. I've made a decision. I've stated it very clearly to the member. If he wishes to relitigate it, I will take a very serious course of action. If he wants to raise a fresh point of order, I'm only too delighted to hear
point
it.
of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Grant
Mr.
Robertson.
Speaker, the opposition parties are granted a number of supplementary questions on the basis of the proportionality of Parliament. So we don't have an unlimited set of questions. It is very difficult for members on this side of the House to undertake the job of the opposition in question time if ministers are answering questions that in a way that simply doesn't even attempt to address what we're doing here, and Mr. McCully has done that consistently throughout question time today.
Order.
It's unacceptable.
No, that's the members now trifling with the chair. I've given a decision as to the manner in which the Minister addressed the question. The member, in asking his question, may be expecting a yes or no answer, and Speaker's rulings are quite clear. I think it's 187, page 187. You cannot express that. I've interpreted that answer to address the question, and if the member wants to go back and relook at the answer given, particularly on the second occasion, I think he's got the ability himself to decipher that it's not going to become accepted practice. No, well, I need to just tell the member, I'll take it from the Honourable Peter Dunne first, but again, this matter's been...
This is a completely different issue.
Then I'm only too happy to hear it.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to draw your attention to Speaker's rulings 190(1) and 190(2) regarding the form of supplementary questions. 190(1) says supplementary questions must not be prefaced with a statement. 190(2) is more specific in terms of the reference to phrases such as given or in the light of. In both the last 2 oral questions, the supplementaries have been prefaced on more than one occasion by given, and I'm just seeking clarification, Mr. Speaker, as to whether those 2 Speaker's rulings still hold or whether they've been supplanted by other rulings that permit that type of conduct.
They certainly haven't been surpassed at this stage. They were clearly written, but if I consider the number of questions, and particularly there were 2 supplementary, in fact, I think 3 supplementary questions earlier by the Green member, Mr. Coates, and on every occasion he started his question, given that. I have been relatively lenient. If members want me to get far tougher and get down to more specific supplementary questions, as I've said on many occasions, I will do so if that be the wish of this House. But I can assure you, I think it would affect the ability of the opposition and the tone of the opposition questions more substantially than it would affect the supplementary questions that come from the government side. A fresh point of order, I hope.
Sir,
is it? No, I just need clarification.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, sir. It is related.
No. If it's I just need to be clear, because I'm going to take a very severe course of action. So I just want the member to understand. We've discussed the issue about whether Mr. Shearer's question was addressed. I've dealt with the matter. If the member raises a completely fresh point of order, I'm only too happy to hear it. But if we're going to continue to relitigate, that leads to disorder. And my only alternative then is to be asking a member to leave the chamber. Does the member wish to raise a point of order? Question number 9.